Okay, before the story, let me go ahead and talk about the backdrops and the props. You're not here, so you can't see them. So I'm going to do a pan around so you at least can see them in your mind. So we learned last week under Persian rule that the Jews were allowed to go home, and they returned home in 3 trips. The first trip right here was led by Zerubbabel, and his mission was to rebuild the temple. And I love this here, if you see that the town, Jerusalem, is still a mess. And then this Zerubbabel's rebuilding of the temple took years, and this took place under the Persian kings of Cyrus the Great, his son Cambyses, Darius the Great, and his son Xerxes. And then we learned that the Jews returned the second time under the leadership of Ezra, and his job was to rebuild the people. And as you can see, the temple is rebuilt, and they're starting to build more houses. And then we have the third trip, and that was under Nehemiah, and his job was to build the wall around Jerusalem. And as you can see, the temple is built, the houses are established, we just need a wall. Now, I want to talk over here, I want to show you these props over here. This is just to show the Persian throne room, and these are the characters and or places in our story today. I'm not going to be able to pan the camera so you can see them, but let me just show you a couple of things. This shows the main characters right here. You have King Xerxes, and that the story takes place in the palace of Susa. And then there are the characters in the story. And over there is it posts the Battle of Thermopylae, that battle against the Spartans took place during the story of Esther, and so did the Battle of Salamis, the war that the Persians lost, the naval battle, and that just shows that also took place during the story of Esther. And in memory of what Esther did, the Jewish people celebrate the holiday of the Feast of Purim. But I love this prop. Oh, right here, we got the king's scepter. We have the dice, or the Purim. And then over here, this is my favorite prop right here. This is our death veil, and it says, "Don't make me use the veil." So I love that. Now, because we have several characters in the story today, I went ahead and did this. That way, when I'm telling the story and you're going like, now, who is that? You can look down here. So let me review them with you. Obviously, King Xerxes. He had a queen, I haven't told you about her yet, named Vashti. And then here is King Leonidas and the Spartans. Over here we have Hadassah. That's Esther, by the way, but her name was Hadassah, you're going to find out. And her cousin who raised her, Mordecai, right here. And then when Esther becomes queen, and then there's always got to be a bad guy, and his name is Haman. Okay? Now, what I want you to see right here where my table is, the story of Esther takes place right here, right between the first and second return under King Xerxes. Okay? I think if I can get in here without knocking everything down, we can begin. All right, you ready? You all set? Okay. Well, don't forget that Cyrus the Great, Cambyses, and Darius the Great had a great hatred for the Greeks. And this hatred was passed down to King Xerxes. Because of that, Xerxes was obsessed with doing something that the other kings could not do, and that was conquering Greece. So remember that. Okay, let's begin. One day, King Xerxes threw this huge banquet at his beautiful palace in Susa. Now, he invited all these important guys from all around his empire, like his governors, his generals, his officials, and other important men. And when these important men arrived at the palace, they were like, wow, would you look at this? I mean, the palace was decorated like you wouldn't believe. Now, the banquet was held in the palace garden. And when they walked to the garden, they saw like these huge pillars made of marble. And attached to the pillars were these big, beautiful, colorful tapestries. And the sidewalks, they were embedded with expensive stones. And the couches were made of gold and silver. And the food, they had never seen that much food before. It wasn't just ordinary food, it was like gourmet food made by Xerxes' chefs. And just when they thought it couldn't get any better, they were served the most expensive wine out of gold cups. I mean, they were like blown away by Xerxes' wealth. Now, this banquet that Xerxes had went on for 6 months. Now, I'm thinking, why did he throw this expensive party, and why did it last 6 months? Well, the Bible doesn't tell us why, but history helps us out here. History tells us that these Persian kings would throw these lavish parties because they could. But in this particular case, Xerxes was probably throwing this party because he wanted to conquer Greece and he needed their help. He needed their help to fight this war. He needed some of their money to help pay for the war. He needed their soldiers to form one large army. He needed to see if they would join him in his desire to conquer the Greeks once and for all. So, by displaying all his wealth, it was a way of saying, look how rich I am. I can pay for most of this war. Look how powerful I am. I can lead this war. After all, I am the King of Kings. 7 days into this party, they got pretty drunk, even Xerxes. And because he was drunk, he started doing stupid things. For example, he sent a message to one of the eunuchs that said, get the queen and bring her here. I want the guys to see how hot she is. His queen's name was Vashti. Vashti, who was hosting a woman's banquet of her own, sent a message back to Xerxes that said, I will not. Most likely what he was asking was inappropriate. Now when Xerxes heard her reply, oh man, he got angry. Her refusal embarrassed him in front of all his guests. After all, it appeared as if he couldn't control his own queen, how could he ever control a large army to conquer Greece? I mean, this made him look weak. So how did he respond? Well, as was customary, he sought advice from his advisors. He was like, what do I do? Vashti disobeyed a direct order. This makes me look weak. What do you think I should do? After discussing the matter, they decided to come down hard on Vashti. They felt like if they didn't, other wives might follow her example and disobey their husbands too. So they wrote a new law or royal decree, and this is what it said. Queen Vashti disobeyed the Lord's order. Her behavior was wrong and will not be tolerated. From this day on, Vashti will never see King Xerxes again. She is no longer queen. King Xerxes will find someone to replace her. Husbands, make sure you're in charge of your households. Wives, respect your husbands and obey them. This decree was sent throughout the empire, and Vashti was removed from her throne. By the time we get to chapter 2 in the book of Esther, 4 years had gone by. Now the Bible doesn't tell us what happened during those 4 years, but history does, so let me fill in the gap. Those important men at Xerxes' party were all in on his desire to invade Greece, and together they spent years preparing for the invasion. Xerxes raised money to buy boats and weapons and food and supplies. He formed and trained a huge army. He mapped out the route they would take over land and by sea. Remember, the Persians were great fighters on land and on sea. Then he built supply stations all along the land route. He built 2 bridges across a sea called Hellespont because it was a shortcut. Once the preparations were completed, it was go time. Off they went, hundreds of thousands of them, if not millions of them. Everything was going great until Xerxes' army reached Hellespont. The bridge he had built ahead of time, the bridges he had built ahead of time were gone, destroyed in a storm. And he was so frustrated, so out of anger, he had his men spank the sea. I don't know what to say about that. Well, after he got done with his temper tantrum, he solved his problem by tying boats together and made new bridges. Now, after his army crossed the sea on those new bridges, they continued marching until they reached the doorway into Greece. This doorway was called the Thermopylae Pass. Remember seeing that in the PowerPoint? It was that narrow strip of land with mountain cliffs on one side and a drop off into the sea on the other side. Well, when they got there, someone was standing in their way. It was King Leonidas and his fierce Spartans. And no matter how hard the Persians fought, they just couldn't get past them until Xerxes found a traitor, a Greek, willing to turn against his own people for money. Now this traitor showed Xerxes a path through the mountain that would come out behind the Spartans. Now when Leonidas saw Persian soldiers on the mountain, he knew it was only a matter of time before they were surrounded. He knew that this was the end. Now the Persians slaughtered the Spartans that day, but Xerxes' victory dance was short-lived because the Persians lost their final battle at sea, and this battle was called the Battle of Salamis. Xerxes couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that he lost and that these Greeks won. I mean, losing this war cost him dearly. He lost a lot of soldiers. He lost several of his immortals. He lost all that money he put into the war, and it hurt his reputation. So by the time he got home, he was embarrassed and deeply depressed. It's at this time we begin chapter 2 in the book of Esther. Xerxes was back at his palace in Susa, but he was extremely depressed. And he started thinking about Queen Vashti, and boy, did he miss her. When his advisors saw how depressed he was, they came up with an idea to cheer him up. They said, Your Royal Highness, how about having a beauty contest? The winner can become your next queen. Xerxes was like, I like that idea. Let's do it. The first thing they did was search for the most beautiful girls throughout the entire Persian Empire. One of the girls they chose was named Hadassah. I think she's right here. So let me tell you a little bit about Hadassah. She was Jewish. Her parents died when she was young. She was raised by her cousin named Mordecai. And you should be able to see him down there as well. Now, as Hadassah was preparing to leave for Susa, Mordecai told her, Don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. You know, Hadassah is a Jewish name, so let's change your name to Esther. She nodded and said, Okay, Mordecai. Esther joined all the other beautiful girls, and off they went to Susa. Now, when they arrived there, they were immediately taken to the king's palace. Now, can you imagine what they might have seen? This huge palace with huge columns and these tall doors and these big rooms and gold and silver everywhere and colorful rugs and colorful tapestries hanging on the walls. I mean, I bet it was breathtaking. Inside the palace, the girls were taken to the harem. Remember what that means? It was the place in the palace where the women lived. And the girls were introduced to their eunuchs who would take care of them. And remember, a eunuch's job was to protect the girls and get them ready for the beauty contest. So the eunuchs gathered the girls together and said, Before you meet the king, first you will have a makeover. This makeover will last 1 year. We will teach you how to soften your skin, clean your teeth so you won't have bad breath, We will teach you how to bathe daily, style your hair, paint your nails, apply makeup, perfume, how to dress. Then we'll teach you manners and how to walk and how to talk properly. In other words, we will teach you how to properly present yourself to the king. Once your 12 months of training are over, each of you will have an opportunity to present yourself before Xerxes. He will look you over and ask you questions. Whichever one he likes the best will become Queen of Persia. Understood? Any questions? Okay then, let's begin the beauty treatments. As the girls were undergoing their treatments, the eunuch in charge of the harem noticed that there was something special about Esther. The more he got to know her, the more he liked her. And eventually she became his favorite. And because he favored her, get this, he gave her her own room and her own servants. I'm thinking, wow, nice, that's a pretty sweet deal. Well, those 12 months flew by and the day of the contest had arrived. Each girl took their turn before Xerxes. After meeting with all the girls, Xerxes finally made his choice. By far, hands down, this girl took every category. She was the smartest. She was the most poised. She was the most beautiful. The winner was Esther. When Xerxes placed the crown on her head, everyone cheered because everyone loved Esther. Esther was now Queen of Persia, and I think she's right there. After she was crowned, Xerxes hosted this huge banquet in her honor. In fact, he called it Esther's banquet. After everything returned to normal, Esther began her duties as queen. Now, this whole time, Esther kept her secret. She never let anyone know that she was Jewish. This one day, Mordecai accidentally overheard two men talking about killing King Xerxes. Immediately he told Queen Esther. Immediately she told Xerxes. Xerxes ordered an investigation, and when the evidence proved that these guys were guilty, they were sentenced to death by hanging. You guys know what that means by now. It means they were impaled on a sharp stick. I mean, shish kebab like a piece of meat. As was customary, everything about the assassination plot was written down in the royal records. Well, this one day, Xerxes announced that he had promoted one of his officials to second in command. The official was named Haman, and he should be the last picture right here. Now, Haman was an egotistical kind of guy. He liked his power, and he wanted everyone to know it. He was like, I'm big and bad, and you better not mess with me kind of guy. Because of Haman's position, it was customary for people to bow to him when he walked by. But Haman noticed that there was this one guy who never bowed when he walked by, and it really bugged him. It bothered Haman so much that he had the guy investigated. And when he found out that the guy was Jewish, he was like, figures. I can't stand the Jews. Then Haman found out the guy's name. Guess what his name was? It was Mordecai. Haman thought, how can I get rid of this guy? I just can't murder the guy because I don't like him, which I don't. How can I get rid of this guy? Then he thought, I know what I'll do. I'll have all the Jews throughout the empire killed. That'll get rid of him. He was so confident in his authority to kill the Jews, he went ahead and picked the day of their execution. No kidding. He did this by rolling the dice. Now, they didn't call it dice, right? They called it Purim or Purim. But this is what he did. It's almost as if like he rolled it like this. I don't know that you can see it. And it's like, oh, okay, on March 18th, I will kill all the Jews. All right? Now, keep in mind I'm making up a date, okay? But that's kind of the way it goes. So Haman was like, okay, I've got this figured out, and I'm going to kill all the Jews on this date, but how do I convince the king to go along with my plan? I got it. I got an idea. Haman went to the palace to see Xerxes. As he stood before him, he bowed and he said, King Xerxes, there's no one like you. You certainly are the King of Kings. But there's a problem I must bring to your attention. There's a certain race of people living in your empire who refuse to obey your laws. They're nothing but a bunch of troublemakers. May I make a suggestion? I think we need to kill them off before their rebellion spreads through the empire. If my suggestion pleases you, make it a law. I'll even give some of my own money if it will help the cause. Xerxes thought about it and said, keep your money, do as you please. Go ahead and write up the decree yourself. Here, use my signet ring to sign it. Once it's signed, it will become law. Little did Xerxes know that he had just signed his queen's death warrant. Well, Haman, happy as a lark, got to work right away. He called for the scribes, had the decree written on scrolls, sealed them with the king's signet ring, and then delivered them as fast as he could throughout the empire. When the decree was read, it said something like this: on March 18th, you are commanded to kill all the Jews within the empire. We don't care if they're young or old, women or children. Kill them all. As a reward, you can take their possessions. But when the decrees were read, the Gentiles were confused. They were like, what? Why? But they were like, okay then. But when the Jews heard the news, panic set in. They tore their clothes and put on sackcloth and threw ashes on their head. They fasted, which means they didn't eat or drink anything. And they walked through the streets weeping and wailing. I mean, who wouldn't? When Mordecai and the Jews living in Susa heard the news, they reacted the same way. When Esther heard about all the commotion, she sent Mordecai a message that read, what's going on? Mordecai sent a message to Esther that said, it's Haman. He's going to kill all the Jews on March 18th. Here's the decree. Read it for yourself. Esther, you must save your people. Go to the king and plead for mercy. Please, Esther, please do this. After Esther heard his message, she sent him another one that said, you know I can't do that. If I approach the king without being called, he will kill me. Mordecai answered her, Esther, have you forgotten? You're Jewish too. You'll die with the rest of us. Esther, listen to me. Maybe that's why God chose you to be queen. Maybe God chose you to save his people. After hearing what Mordecai had to say, she sent him one last message that said, Mordecai, gather together all the Jews living in Susa. Fast for me for 3 days. I will do the same. On the 3rd day, I will go before the king without permission. If I die, I die. So, Mordecai carried out her instructions. During those 3 days, Esther carefully thought through how she would approach the king. On the 3rd day, Esther, dressed in her royal robes, walked through the palace and stood in the hallway outside of the throne room. From behind his curtain, Xerxes saw her. At this point, I would imagine everyone saw her. I bet you could hear a pin drop. I bet they were thinking, what is she doing? No one approaches the king without permission. Will he kill her? Look at her. She acts as if she's going to start walking in. You know, I can just see them looking at Esther and looking at Xerxes and so on, like wondering what he would do. And you know what? I'm sure it wasn't easy for Esther, for goodness sakes. I bet her heart was pounding out of her chest. But when Xerxes saw her, I mean, she came to a point where she wasn't supposed to come. And when he saw her, he took his scepter and extended it to Esther. And this meant, yes, you may approach me. Esther walked into the throne room, touched the end of the scepter, and bowed before him. What can I do for you, Esther? What is your request? Asked Xerxes. She answered, I want to invite you and Haman to a private banquet today. Sure, he said, we'll be there. Now I'm thinking, now why didn't she just go ahead and tell him what she wanted, right? Because she was smart. You see the king and people around him in the throne room. They could hear everything that was spoken. And being the smart girl that she was, she knew better than to embarrass him in front of others. Remember, he didn't know that she was Jewish. He didn't know that Haman had tricked him. If she would have blurted it all out for everyone to hear, he would have looked weak in front of others. She wanted to tell him in private. Smart girl. So Xerxes and Haman went to Esther's banquet. After the meal, and as he sipped his wine, whoa, that scared me. Xerxes, is it on still? Sorry, blooper. After the meal, and as he sipped his wine, Xerxes turned to Esther and said, "What do you want to ask me, Esther?" She said, "If it's okay with you, and only with your permission, would you and Haman come to another banquet tomorrow? I will ask my question then." Xerxes agreed. So I'm like, wait a minute. Another banquet? Why would she ask them to another banquet? I don't get this. Well, I think, my personal opinion, she was building curiosity. And I think Xerxes was definitely curious. I bet he was thinking, what's going on here? Why would she have risked her life coming to see me? She did save me from an assassination plot once. It must be pretty important. After the banquet, as Haman was walking home, he thought to himself, man, am I all that or what? I was invited to the Queen's banquet, and now I get to go to her next one. I am hot stuff around here. As he walked through the streets, he saw people bowing, but then there he was again, the only one not bowing, Mordecai. I mean, this guy got on his last nerve and filled him with rage. When Haman got home, I get tickled at that, sorry. When Haman got home, he had company. He had a few friends had stopped by for a visit. So during the visit, Haman started bragging about himself. I'm so rich. Did you know that I have 10 sons? Remember what that means? I'm so important that everyone bows to me when I walk by. I'm the king's favorite. I was the only one invited to the queen's banquet today. Yep, that was me. But you know what? There's one thing that irritates the snot out of me. There's this Jew who refuses to bow to me, and I can't stand that guy. Haman's wife and friends said, man, really? You know what you ought to do? Like build this really tall, sharp pole tonight. In the morning, like ask the king's permission to impale him on it. Like that'll show him. Haman looked at him and said, you know what? I will. I like that. As soon as his friends left, he told his men to build the pole. I mean, this guy had confidence, unbelievable confidence. He thought he could get this done. He had his guys build the pole. Now that night, King Xerxes had trouble getting to sleep. So he had one of his servants read to him from the royal records. And as he was being read to, let me say that again. As it was being read to him, it had been written that Xerxes had been saved from an assassination plot by a man named Mordecai. Xerxes stopped him and said, wait, I remember that. Is there anything written in there about rewarding Mordecai for saving my life? So the servant kind of scanned the records and said, no, he was never rewarded. Xerxes was like, oh my goodness, how did I overlook such a great deed? Well, we'll take care of that tomorrow. Now the next morning, Haman was at the palace waiting for the king. As he waited, man, he was all pumped up. He couldn't wait to ask the king if he could impale Mordecai. When the king called for them, he was like, okay, here we go. But before Haman could open his mouth, Xerxes said, Haman, what do you think I should do for a man who truly pleases me." Haman, who thought the king was talking about him, said, "Well, I think you should dress him in royal robes. I think you should place a royal hat on his head. I think you should put him on your royal horse and ride him through the streets. And while he's riding through the streets, have an announcer say, 'This is what's done for the man who delights the king.' I think that's what you should do, Your Highness." Xerxes looked at him and said, "Yes, great idea. Now, go find a man named Mordecai and do all these things for him." Listen, Haman's mouth must have gone, his ego went from this to this. He thought that Xerxes was talking about him. And to make matters worse, the very man Haman wanted killed will be paraded through the streets like a hero. Now, of course, Haman did as he was told. That day, instead of being shish kebabbed on a pole, Mordecai became a hero. Now what was Haman going to do? He already had the pole built. Well, he ran home to talk things over with his wife and friends. Now what do? He asked them. I've already sent out the decree to kill every Jew. What do I do? But before Haman could think of a way out of his mess, the king's eunuch arrived to take him to Esther's next banquet. At the banquet, after the meal, Xerxes asked Esther, "Esther, what would you like to ask me?" Esther took a deep breath and said, "Please, please save my life and the lives of my people." "What are you talking about, Esther?" "Someone issued an order to kill me and all my people." Who did this? Who would do such a thing?" Esther stood up and said, "Him." Now I can just see Haman like sliding down in his seat, right? Sliding down in his chair thinking, uh-oh, busted. Xerxes, Superman, stood up and marched out of the room. Well, this isn't looking so good for old Haman, is it? But Haman, he jumped up, threw himself on Esther's couch, and begged for his life. Now think about this for a minute. The man who wanted to kill every Jew is begging a Jew for his life. And to make matters worse, he threw himself on Esther's couch. That was a big no-no. Men were not allowed to touch or get close to the queen. While he was still on her couch, Xerxes walked in, and when he saw Haman near Esther, he said, "Wow, Haman, I leave the room and you try to get cozy with my wife. What is wrong with you?" After he said that, Xerxes walked up to Haman and put a black veil over his head. That wasn't good, because that was the death veil. When Xerxes found out about Haman's pole, he told his guards, "Impale Haman on his own pole." And that was the end of Haman. Now when Xerxes found out that Mordecai was Esther's cousin, he summoned him or called for him. Xerxes said, "Mordecai, take this signet ring. You are now second in command." I'm like, way to go, Mordecai. But Esther and Mordecai still had a problem on their hands. Haman's decree had already gone out. The day had already been set, and the king could not break his own law. So, with Xerxes' permission, Mordecai and Esther wrote a new law. And it said, on March 18th, every Jew has permission to defend themselves. When March 18th came, the Jews were armed and ready. And get this, the governors and administrators were armed and ready and standing right there with them. Now, a few people tried to attack them, but they were easily defeated. So the people just left them alone. The threat of annihilation was over. Esther had saved her people from destruction. In memory of that event, Mordecai declared a new holiday called the Feast of Purim. And guess what? The Jews still celebrate this holiday today. So this is where I close the Old Testament story. But our story, what I'm saying is that is the last Old Testament story. But our one big story isn't finished yet. We have one more story left. and it's called the 400 silent years. The 400 silent years is between the Old Testament and the New Testament. They're the 400 years that the Bible doesn't talk about. But history has a lot to say about those years. In this last story, God will place the last two props on his stage before the Messiah comes. And these two props will be Greece and Rome. In that story, you will hear about Alexander the Great. You're going to hear more about the Spartans and how they were raised. Oh my goodness. You're going to hear about gladiators. You're going to hear about the first Olympic Games. I don't know if I should tell you this, but I do. I tell kids, get this. The first Olympic athletes, no kidding, they competed against each other in the nude. I mean, what is up with the Greeks and their clothes? I don't know. But anyway, you're going to hear all about it next week, well, most about it. So come back and join me for our last story. Shalom.